Woo, thank you. Okay, and with that, I will pass the floor to Jordan Bauer.
Hey, everybody. Nice to see you all. In a moment, I'm going to put you into an icebreaker so you can get to talk yourself and speak to some other people. Maybe you've met them before, maybe you haven't. But before I do, I just want to say two quick things to set us up. The first thing is that this is going to be a highly hands-on workshop, which means you're going to be doing a lot of the work. It's going to be playful, it's going to be practical, but it's going to involve using a part of your brain that maybe some of you don't feel totally comfortable with. And so the request I want to make at the very beginning is that you take that logical part of your brain and you put it to the side for about 90 minutes. You don't need to lose it all together, but what I really want to do is challenge you to think differently. What you're going to get here today is not going to be a how-to, it's really going to be provocative. So if you can, stomach it for 90 minutes, put your logic to the side, and then we'll come back. The second thing I want to say, just in terms of structure, is that over the course of the next 90 or so minutes, we're going to flow in and out of breakout groups. So in a moment, I'm going to put you into a breakout group with another 4 or 5 people. I'm going to give you some time to chat. You're going to come back. And then over the course of the rest of the hour and a half, we're going to kind of flow through a variety of one-on-one situations where you're actually going to be telling a story and getting feedback from somebody else. So my request to you, if you feel comfortable, please turn on your video. If you don't feel comfortable, that's totally okay. But we're all here, we're all in our bedrooms anyway. So if you can jam with it, then I think that'd be great. If not, no problem, or we're in our cars. But if you can roll with it, I think that would be great. Does that sound good? Okay, great. So I'm going to put you into breakout rooms right now. It will be about 4 or 5 people in a room. I'm going to give you a total of 8 minutes to answer 3 questions. First, you can do your intro spiel, who you are, why you're here, all that kind of stuff. But secondly, I want you to answer, why specifically have you come here today to improve your personal storytelling? What's motivating you to be here today? And the third question I want you to talk about as a group is, what has changed in workplace communication, besides the obvious, over the last year? Where is workplace communication and specifically leadership communication going as we move into the future? So 3 questions: who you are, why you're here, and what's happening in leadership communication, and where are we going as we move into the future? I'm going to give you 8 minutes in groups of about 4 or 5, starting as soon as I get you going. So 30 people, what's that? That's there. Assign automatically. Great. Rooms are open, so we'll see you back in about 8 minutes. Tell me why are some of you here? What drew you to this specific event?
I'll take that one on quickly, Jordan. I'm in tourism and leading a group, my whole team. And totally believe that storytelling is so important in both to get a team to want to follow you, but also in tourism, it's what we do. And I do it, but I'm sure I could do it better.
Other folks, what brings you here today? Feel free to jump out popcorn style. What brings you here today? Love to hear maybe 2 or 3 answers from a couple folks.
Learning to tell a story, because I am much happier being an introvert. And if I can do a story, maybe I can get out of that shell.
Great. Congratulations for challenging yourself. That's courageous. Anybody else? What brings you here today?
Yeah, I'd love to share mine. Hi, Jordan.
Hi, Marina.
I launched a business called Brand of a Leader, which is a personal branding agency for entrepreneurs. And I love telling my own stories, but I would love to learn how to tell stories of others.
Great. Maybe one other person. What's bringing you here today?
Well,
I'll jump in. I don't mind. So I think similar to other people, I think a lot of us are quite technologically focused, or we're really focused on how we do things and not so much on how we explain to people how we do things. And so that's very important, is talking about maybe the results or what the outcomes are, to your audience, and knowing your audience so that you can maybe even adjust your story each time. I think that's a really important thing that I've come here to learn a little bit more about.
Great, thank you. Do most people hear themselves in those answers, or is there anything that wasn't said they want to add why you're here today?
I'll just add, Jordan, it's for me coming, it's just to have the maximum impact. I think all of us have these amazing stories to tell, and how do we have the greatest impact when we do tell our stories? So becoming the best storyteller that we can be.
Great. Let me ask you, what's changing in communication right now, in leadership communication? Besides this thing.
I would think that, trust is becoming so much more important, both in how we market and communicate, but also as leaders. And I think storytelling is a really powerful way to show vulnerability and to open up a channel for an emotional discussion that builds trust with people that we're leading.
That seems to me like a really clear theme that came out of 2020. Do most folks agree with that? What else is happening in the world that's changing in leadership communication?
We talked in our group about expectations of authenticity. We had a good breadth of different generational vintage folks, and got a clear sense that across the group, everybody was expecting more from one another and leaders and how they're communicating.
Yeah, I mean, that's really clear. People were literally out in the streets protesting for that this year. And, one of the things I always think about when I do this kind of call with, a group, and maybe a group of many strangers, is, could you have imagined last year at this time that you would be inviting strangers into your bedroom for a business meeting? And suddenly it's become the de facto way that we all communicate. So, already in the previous few years with social media and so on, the boundaries between personal life and professional life were eroding for all of us. But I think it should be really clear right now that they are totally gone. There is no more professional, there's no more personal, there's just one human being, the human being who's here. That's been a really clear theme for me. Anything else that you see changing in leadership communication in the world?
I would also add that there's a bigger expectation for more communication from leaders. One, because, one crisis after another, so bigger need for crisis communication that is coming from leaders and not from PR departments. And number two, also, employees, but also clients, customers, they want to know who are the people behind, what the company stands for, and connecting company messaging with the messaging that comes directly from leaders. So there's a higher expectation. No longer can leaders really hide kind of behind closed doors and just work on their craft and building the business. There's an expectation of that outward presence more and more, I find.
I think that's totally right. Someone else was speaking to you want to add in? Whoever that was?
Yeah. Jordan, it was me, Alexis. One thing that I feel has changed a lot is that before, your team somehow trusts you because you were the leader. And now you as a leader need to persuade and motivate your team. So in order to do that, you have to be able to deliver your message super clear to the team. I think that's a change. You need more persuasion and more engagement with your team.
Yeah, I think part of what has happened in the world is that the people that we traditionally looked at as leaders have been undermined, right? And so suddenly there are new leaders rising to the surface. And for most of us, that's a really, really good thing. But part of the problem with that we're all facing is that there's absolutely nobody in the whole, I would F-bomb world right now, who has any idea what's going to happen tomorrow. And so whereas once upon a time as a traditional leader, you could say, I know where we're going, follow me. Suddenly, in my opinion, leadership has become much less about I'm in charge and I'm taking the lead. And it's much more about a bunch of folks getting together in a circle and trying to figure out where to go. Does that feel consistent? Or do you agree, disagree? I love hand gestures, so you can give me a thumbs up. Yeah, go for it, Kevin.
It's funny, you said, I know where we're going. And I think in a lot of my interactions, it's I know how we're going. Mm-hmm. It seems to be rising in importance, right? The where is less important than the how. It's fascinating to me.
I think that's really profound. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. These days when I do work or when I work with awesome organizations, I hear people repeatedly say, sometimes I work in the US, so I apologize for my switch in accents, but here I'll say the process is the product, right? The how is increasingly much more important than the where. And that means there's a much bigger emphasis on culture and the ways of working within an organization, as opposed to just the pretty narrative about how we got here. I want to tell you a really quick story just to introduce myself and give you a sense for where I come from. I was born in Toronto. I grew up there. And from when I was very young, I actually wanted to get out. So I did a lot of travel when I was in my teens and especially through my 20s. I've been to India. I spent about 2.5 years traveling through India. I lived in Europe for a while. The big trip that I did was I spent about a year walking down the West Coast from Vancouver to Mexico about 10 years ago. And at the end of all of this travel, I decided that I wanted to write a book. You know, I had all these experiences. I thought I had something really interesting to tell the world. I wasn't yet a storyteller, but through the process of writing and writing, I gradually became one. And that's what led me to start this business. I actually moved to Victoria. I lived in Victoria for 4 years from 2013 to 2017, where I met my girlfriend, who is now my wife, and now we live in Vancouver. But something really interesting has been happening to me over the course of the last 10 years as I've been working on this endless book project. And that's that every single time I have a clear focus in mind for where I want my story to go, something changes. Either the world changes or my perspective on myself changes. And it feels like every time I rewrite the story, I'm endlessly chasing a moving target. Because what happened to me means something different today than it did back then. And what I'm sure of is that tomorrow it's going to mean something different than it did today. So when I think about storytelling, and the frame I want to put around this session for you is, you know, often when we think of stories, we think about telling stories about our past. You know, there was this one time I fought a bear in the forest, or whatever your equivalent of that is. I caught a fish that was this big. But I also want to suggest that there is a new type of storytelling emerging, and that's all about telling stories about the future, telling stories about a world that doesn't exist yet, as a way of bringing people on board, whether that's internal folks or external folks, to get them to follow you, not just for who you've been, but for who you are becoming. And I think that speaks really nicely to what Kevin raised about this idea of how. So telling how stories as opposed to past stories. And I want to suggest that as an idea to keep in the back of your mind throughout our conversation, because the truth is, I don't actually know how you're going to do that. It's truly going to be a creative process, not just here, but in the weeks and months to come after that. So I really hope to seed an idea for you about how do you tell stories about the future that are going to make people want to follow you. Is that any thoughts, comments about that? Juicy? Great. So to start us off, I want to get into a storytelling warm-up exercise. And so what I'm going to do in a moment is pair you up, or I'll have Bessie help me pair you all up. You'll be in one-on-one with folks for 6 minutes. And the idea here is that you're each going to have 2 minutes to tell a story about yourself and 1 minute for the other person to give you feedback. So 2 minutes for a story, 1 minute for feedback, and then you're going to switch. In choosing your story, I want to suggest telling a story that's about a change or a realization. Why do you think it's better to tell stories about moments of change or realization? I'm going to do this all day, so.
They're interesting.
Yeah. I think especially for the more literal-minded folks, the engineers and the lawyers in the room and accountants, when we think about stories, we tend to think of them as a series of events. Like today, I woke up in the morning, I had a meeting at 9 o'clock, then I had a meeting at 10, then I met a friend at 11:15 for a coffee. We walked around and talked about art for a little bit. I came home. Like, that's literally what happened today, but that's not a very interesting story. And the reason it's not an interesting story is because it doesn't have this interesting component of a change or a realization. So I want to challenge you, and I know for many of you it's going to be off the cuff, so feel free to kind of flub with this, and challenge you to take 2 minutes to tell a story that involves a change or a realization in your life. It could be in work, it could be personal. Feel free to figure out how intimate you want to get. You don't need to tell the deepest, darkest skeleton in your closet, but really try to focus in on a change or a realization. So Bessie, I'd love you to pair everybody up. Give people 7 minutes so you have a little bit of time, but make sure everybody takes at least 2 minutes to tell a story. Last thing before I let you go, when you have 2 minutes to tell the story, what should the other person be doing during your 2 minutes? Listening. What happens if somebody stops after 30 seconds and says that's the end of the story? What are you going to do for the next 90 seconds? Nothing. You're going to give that person all the airtime they want, okay? 2 minutes for them, a minute for you for feedback, and then swap. Everybody clear on that?
Okay,
Great.
Jordan, so you want 7 minutes in total?
7 minutes, everybody one-on-one.
Okay, all right, opening rooms. Come back if you have any problems.
Yeah. So I'm going to give you some more opportunities to do that today, but I first want to start by asking a very basic question. What makes a good story?
Emotion.
Emotion. Who said the E word?
I did.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit more about what you mean by emotion.
I just think that in emotion, you know, if you can be vulnerable and there's vulnerability on your part in that story, then people say, wow, this is interesting. I need to listen more. And I'm a big believer that we all connect on an emotional level first, and emotion trumps facts. And so if you can connect emotionally, then there's engagement. And once there's engagement, there's communication, and it takes off from there.
Wait. Emotion trumps facts. Is that a pun?
No. You know what? No, sorry.
Nice.
Too soon. But I agree with what you said, Ernie, and I just want to take that actually one step further. In my experience, emotion is like catnip for humans. You know, like, have you ever been on one of those websites? I know we all have, where it's like, you know, this guy jumped off an airplane. You'll never believe what happens next. And that desire to click and to get the emotional reward is one of the most important drives for us as human beings. And one of the things that we do a disservice of as business people is we totally cut out all the emotion. So did anyone tell a story like that started with something like, my realization was that X? Did anyone just tell a story that was kind of like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thanks for letting me pick on you. The problem with that is that by giving away the punchline, we take out all the tension in the story. So I think one of the components, and we all know this because we all see it and we watch it on Netflix and we hear it and we read about it. But one of the essential components of a story, when I say to you, I'm going to tell you a story, what I'm really saying is I am about to promise you that you are going to have an emotional experience. And my role is to deliver on that emotional experience in any way. So what is an emotional experience? It might be a laugh. It might be like one of those moments. It might be make my heart clench. It might make me enraged. But the promise of I will tell you a story is that I deliver an emotional experience. And that's the metric that I'm evaluating myself on. Did I deliver the emotional experience I intended to? If I can do that, then I've been an effective storyteller. If I haven't, then there's a place to tweak. What else makes a good story?
Conflict.
No, it doesn't.
It does so.
Tell me a little bit more about what conflict means in a storytelling context.
There's some tension. You don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. One of the clearest ways to create conflict in stories is by asking a question and then suspending the answer. That's literally called suspense. So if I said, for example, you'll never guess what this guy did when he walked into Bonnie Henry's office yesterday, and then I make you wait a second or two for the answer, then that creates suspense. Or if I said something like, I have to tell you about the time where I had the worst meal of my entire life, I'm posing a question that promises some sort of emotional reward. So really thinking about how you frame a question that grabs people's attention is at the core of good storytelling. What else? What else is a good story in your experience?
A resolution to the conflict or to the challenge. You want some kind of resolution or lesson learned.
Yeah, you want people to follow you on the journey to get there. So if your pot of gold at the end of the rainbow is the thing that you realized, then obviously there needs to be a series of steps. That's why we watch the movie. The main character is up, they're down, they try, they fail, they try, they fail again until finally they get the thing they're looking for. That framing is one of the most effective and common forms of good storytelling. Maybe one last thing. What's a good story in your opinion?
Relatable?
Yeah, relatable. I think that's definitely true. if it's about you talking, it's going to be much less interesting than if it's about them. So how do you do this? How do you put all this stuff together? How do you make a story? You want me to tell you? Did anybody who was listening to stories just then hear somebody tell a particularly good story? Did you think your partner was a good storyteller?
Yes, I would say that Marina's a phenomenal storyteller.
Why? What did she do?
I would say that she was super personal. The stories were personal stories. The hand gesture, the body movement, the words that she used, they were phenomenal. She was super. They put humor in the story too. Yeah, those are the kind of things that I love about her story.
Jamie, I saw your hand up. What was your experience like?
Well, with Fiona, she kind of she introduced the fact that she like the vulnerability side, that she just felt that maybe, I don't know if this is the correct term, but didn't know if she was really ready or prepared for the new position that she was taking on. And I really liked where she used a term with me that she just realized that she had to lean in. She had to, it was metaphoric, and that she, grabbed her nose and had to jump into the pool. And, you can relate to metaphors. So I felt that was also a good aspect of her storytelling.
Great. Well, maybe one other person, something your storytelling partner did really well.
I was paired up with Robin, and what I liked about her story was, despite only having 1 or 2 minutes to tell the story, I felt I learned a lot about her. Like, it wasn't a 20-minute discussion of all her backgrounds. It was some high points that explained, how she got here. And so I felt in a very brief time, I learned a lot about her.
Yeah, great. I mentioned before that there's a difference between stories and anecdotes. And so I just want to spend a moment or two just expanding on that a little bit. Like I said, an anecdote is a series of events that happen in your day or maybe in your life. Often, you probably tell anecdotes when people ask you, how did you get to where you are today? Most of us have stories like, well, I graduated from this college or university, I went on to this job, I moved to this city, and so on. It's a series of events that moves you through life. But what we find with good stories is that they are actually about 5 seconds of your life. Most great stories focus on 5 seconds of your life so that they are extremely zoomed in. They're not just these kind of, I'm flowing over the timeline of my life at 35,000 feet, but I'm actually there in the moment when the moment of change or realization happened. So I'd love to workshop this with somebody right now. Would someone be willing to share what their moment of change or realization was? Anybody want to volunteer?
Sure, I'll do that.
Great, Vikram, please.
Yeah, so I just actually shared that with Scott in the breakout session. This is a personal. Started about 6 years ago. I was living life like everybody else, challenges, stress, fun, anything that would happen, it would affect me. Now it doesn't. So what changed? About 6 years ago, you hear about people, somebody had cancer, somebody died, somebody's family passed away. I'm like, you know what? I'm not living in the moment. It was a self-realization. And I said, you know what, starting today, or just, I can't remember today, but I said, I'm going to live for today. And that motto, Carpe Diem, I embraced to the extreme. And what is extreme? Because you see people who tattoo Carpe Diem, they talk about it. I said, I'm going to live Carpe Diem. So now.
Wait. So I'm going to stop you intentionally.
You
because you volunteered. So I'm going to workshop you a little bit. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So what's the realization that Vikram is putting forward here? It's really clear, right? There was a moment when he decided to seize the day. But did you see how he zipped over that moment? He said the moment, but he didn't actually take us into that moment. So my challenge to you, Vikram, is, and please feel free to talk this out right now for us as a group. Yeah. What actually was the moment in your life when you decided to Carpe Diem?
You bet. You want me to go?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I came back from New Year's, holidays, and somebody was having lunch and they said, hey, any New Year's resolutions? And I said, well, let me think. So I thought, and 4 minutes go by. My friend says, well, hello, are you still awake? I said, yeah, give me 2 more minutes. So it took me almost 6 minutes. And I said, you know what? There is none. He said, what do you mean? I said, life is flawless. And I used the word flawless. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, everything in my life is going exactly the way I want. So why make resolution and why change my life when it's almost flawless? So that was just about 6 years ago. And I started pretty much, I said, you know what? Everything in my life is going just the way I want it. And why let day-to-day stresses affect you? Because tomorrow morning I may not be awake. So that was the moment.
So to the rest of the group, I want to ask, what was the 5-second moment? Can we zoom in on that? Crickets.
When he was asked if he had a New Year's resolution or not.
Yeah. So where would the story probably start?
It was New Year's of whatever year that was. It was New
Right,
Year's
so-
Eve. It was, yeah.
Exactly. So rather than, for example, rather than saying this is a whole bunch of stuff that happened, it's starting in the moment was where the tension started to build up, because we were actually there with him moving towards that 5-second moment of realization. And what we'll find is, what you will find is that when you zoom in on that moment, you can take out a lot of the explaining details. You can let the story stand for itself. You might have heard this before in storytelling. We say, show, don't tell. And what you're going to find is that by focusing in on that 5-second moment, the meaning of that comes through. I'm going to give you another chance to practice that, but I want to just pick on one other person to kind of really make this point. So is anyone brave enough to volunteer? Or have I scared you?
Sure, I'll jump in.
Great, Michael.
Using the newly learned knowledge, in 2018, I stopped sleeping.
Before you tell the story, just tell us what the 5-second moment is first.
That was it. I stopped sleeping.
You stopped sleeping.
Yeah.
Okay, so take me in now to when the 5-second moment was where you stopped sleeping.
If it was a 5-second moment, that would have been interesting. This was a long burn into stopping sleeping. Yeah, I guess for me, it took a little bit of time to kind of realize the extent of the issue that I had. And then it got to the point where I was sleeping hour, maybe 2 hours a night for weeks and weeks at a time.
So I'm gonna pause you here. And I want to say to the rest of the group, do you see how he's kind of going around the story, but he's not going into the story? But he's talking about generally what happened. And it's not to say that you're lying or anything like that, Michael, but more to say that what we're looking for is a powerful 5-second moment where the change or realization happened. So if somebody else was going to tell Michael's story for him, you're just going to make it up. What story might you tell about the moment when you stopped sleeping? Just make it up.
Lying in my bed, unable to fall asleep.
Yeah, or maybe it's like, I was really stressed at work one day and I came home and, there was a flood in my basement and the crows were inside my house. The squirrels were everywhere. My house was a disaster. The only place I could sleep was, on my couch, and there was like rats underneath the couch. I'm exaggerating, obviously. And as I lay there, I suddenly decided I am never going to sleep again in the rest of my life. That's the example of a 5-second moment that we can zoom in on deeply. I'm going to pause. Questions, thoughts? What are you thinking about this? Does this resonate? What's confusing? Talk it out a little bit for me.
So you have to go right, like immediately into the core of the story, not build up to it, because I feel like a build up is a really nice way, like you build, then there's a story and then like, boom. And
Yeah.
you're saying go right straight into the peak.
I'm saying that if you want to give someone a vulnerable, emotionally meaningful experience, the closer you can get to that 5-second moment, the better. Because that 5-second moment of change is where all the power is in a story.
That's so hard.
I'm struggling a little bit with this.
So then why did you give us 2 minutes?
Because I'm getting you going. Sorry, Kevin, go for it.
I was just going to say, what happens when changes in evolution over a long period of time?
That's true and a boring story.
Okay, fair enough.
How do you fit in a 5-second, like get right to the point when, like what happened to suspense?
Right. So the 5-second moment is going to be the climax, the end of the story. It's the goal of where you're going to. But the suspense is in getting there. And we heard it a little bit in Vikram's story. You know, he referenced at some point he was scared and he mentioned cancer. And right away, when he mentioned something like that, the tension builds because we don't know where the story is going. So when you have that 5-second moment clearly in mind, then you can structure your story so that it ends at that point. Thoughts, questions, resistance, keep them coming.
Nobody can sleep with rats under the couch. I just gotta say.
It's disgusting.
Jordan, a quick question. So I don't think I'm a great storyteller, and I sort of build the story with the foundation to get to that point that you're talking about. And I hold on to that point for the end, and that's not popular.
Why isn't it popular?
I don't know. It's, but I do that, and my wife, who loves me, will say, "Oh, Kevin's just building this story. Hold on, he'll get to his point in a couple minutes."
Well, what I want to do right now, and with Bessie's help, is I want to put you all back in one-on-ones. And again, this time I'm going to give you another, let's say 6 minutes. The goal of this next 6 minutes is not to tell each other the story. The goal is for each of you to help the other find the 5-second moment. So we're looking for 5 seconds pulled out of your life, which was the instant of change or realization. Now, I want to be clear, the change or the realization does not need to be the biggest and most meaningful thing in your life. It's actually going to be easier right now if the change or realization is a relatively small thing. So looking for a moment where there was some change or realization. And I'll give you 6 minutes in pairs to kind of talk that through a little bit, and then we'll talk again as a group. How was that the second time around? Harder?
I think it was easier because it really kind of helped you hone in on, well, what is going to grab my attention here?
That's great.
And that was the what Mike and I really worked what worked well for us. So
how about other people? What worked well for you? What worked or what didn't work in that last 8 minutes?
So helpful. I just want to thank my work partner, Christine. She just gave me like a really brilliant suggestion that I wrote down that I'm going to use. She essentially took what I told her and, okay, so this is the 5-second and like, this is a punchy one-liner so that I can open with a punchy one-liner that already grabs attention. And she's like, well, you could think of what the one-liner is. I'm like, no, I wrote down what you said because that one's perfect. That's the one I'm going to use. So it was really, it really helps when you get that external perspective. It really helps because we get blinded by our own narrative. It all seems so important to us. And then someone else can say, well, this is not clear. This is not so important. And this is really interesting. So super helpful.
Great. Anybody else, any feedback or insights from that last 8 minutes?
Well, I think that I was partnered with Claire, and I think we almost had a similar question that when you kind of start with the punchline kind of thing, then where do you go to and what is the kind of storytelling structure after that? And are you thinking that when you start with that 5-second realization that the story should be getting in depth about the realization, the emotions, the feeling, the conflict, the resolution in that 5 seconds, or you've got the background as well that you want to fit in? So maybe you can tell us just a little bit more about how you see the structure when you start with kind of the ending in a way.
Yeah. So I'm going to take the structured question and put it to the side for a second, but I'll come back to it. But I think maybe the most important thing I can teach today, is that when we tell a story, right, it's not about explaining. Great storytelling is about connecting between storyteller and audience. So rather than giving, just to Marina's point, rather than giving all the information, first this happened, then this happened, then that happened, what you want to do is be with your audience in the how of the storytelling, in the process of the storytelling. So like, AJ, can I use your story? AJ, yeah, cool. So Ajay's story was about getting rejected from a school that he had applied to, right? So if I were going to explain his story, I would say, when I was 25, I grew up here, I lived in Calgary, I wanted to be a filmmaker, and then this happened, and then that happened. Like, it's lots of explanation, right? But if I wanted to be with the audience in the storytelling, I would tell the story something like this. So on this very frigid, cold Calgary day, I walked into my front door and my mother was there. And as I took off my jacket and hung it up on the hook, my mother said, Ajay, there is this letter from you from a school waiting for you on your desk. And I was very excited because this was a letter I had been waiting for a very long time. So I slowly started walking up the stairs. The floorboards were creaking. There was snow on the window. Do you see what I'm doing? I'm really drawing out the experience. It's like happening in real time. And so now it's not about explanation. It's about it's bringing you as the audience in with me so that we can experience it together. That is the most important thing that you can learn about storytelling. When you make your stories experiences, then it doesn't matter what you tell a story about because people will feel connected to you. Thoughts, comments, questions about that? Does that resonate?
I can, yeah, no, I'll compare it to when we have, so from my camp world, when we have kids in, at camp in the evenings and we're doing storytelling around the campfire, it's interesting because generally we will put all those details in to draw out campfire and just make sure we cover our activity space. Okay. But now what is amazing is to hear that that is actually the best way to tell a story. And I know that it's interesting because the kids are listening every single detail that you're telling as we're just truly trying to draw out a story for the sake of time killing, and making it as detailed and ridiculous as possible. Not that these are ridiculous stories, but we're, by adding in every little element that we can think of to create a view of what we're trying to disclose and share with them. And so it's awesome to hear that that is actually, great storytelling. So,
and to be clear, like there's a limit, if I was to pretend that I was a Victorian novelist and I was talking about like the texture of the socks that I was wearing as I was walking up the stairs, then at a certain point, you're going to get bored. Mm-hmm. Like you need to feel like I'm progressing towards a payoff and it's happening quickly enough that you're going to get there. Because you don't want to listen to me talk for 35 minutes only to find out that there is no payoff there, right? So there's a balance between the details and the attention span of your audience. If you're giving a speech, if you're meeting someone at a networking event, you might only have 30 seconds to tell that story. But the point is dropping me into it as if I was watching it in real time, as if there was a GoPro on top of your head and I'm seeing and feeling and experiencing everything that you're seeing and feeling and experiencing. Other thoughts, questions, arguments with this idea?
It's just hard to do in 2 minutes. You're rushing through the details and the vivid details too.
Totally. And that's why this process, the process that we're engaged in right now, is so important, which is practicing and getting feedback. No storyteller just makes up a story on a spot. All of us start by slowly refining, and we edit. We look at a story and we say, oh, this is the interesting part. I'm going to focus in on this 5-second moment. And I'm going to tell it once and then figure out, okay, this landed, that didn't land. It's kind of like a comedian testing material. And so gradually you start to figure out what works and how to focus in on something. And I would say, I said this earlier, but to repeat it again, often stories that are about small moments of change are more interesting and easy to tell than the big moments of your life. So like often people, when they want to tell their story that involves a job change, a relationship change, a child, like the major moments of life, those are hard stories to tell for novice and developing storytellers. But if you tell stories about small moments, like here's an example. So, I'm in BC, like many of you, Dr. Bonnie Henry, of course, has told us not to leave within 10 feet of our house. Well, I had a friend in Salt Spring Island, and we made plans to get together last weekend. And I was just trying to figure out, what do I do? Do I disobey the provincial health orders and get on a ferry and go to Salt Spring? Or do I stay at home? And to make a long story short, in the end, we were literally packing up the car when my wife and I looked at each other and said, we can't do this. We decided that being socially responsible was better than going to see this friend. That's a tiny little moment of change or realization that actually turns into an excellent story because it's consumable, it's relatable, it's relatively vulnerable, and it's accessible to an audience like this. And so one of the pieces of homework I want to suggest to you is on a weekly, or if you can stomach it, daily basis, jot down something that might make a good story. I know somebody who recommends doing this in a spreadsheet in a very, very simple way. A lot of you are systems people, so this will appeal. 2 columns. Column 1, date. Column 2, no more than 2 or 3 sentences summarizing the story. And gradually, over time, what you're going to see is you actually have many, many, many stories at your disposal. And as you start to learn how to take those stories and look for the 5-second moment of realization, then that's going to gradually improve your ability to make up stories in real time. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. In the story I just told, where was the 5-second moment of realization?
When you looked
at each other and said, we can't do this.
Right. So like I gave you a literal snapshot of my life. So that's what I'm referring to when I talk about those 5-second moments.
I have a question. Where does, you brought up, you referred to a comedian and it made me wonder, where's there room for, where's the good place for humor?
I mean, always.
Always?
You know,
okay.
I said earlier that emotion is catnip for human beings, and humor is probably one of the top 3 for sure, right? Like I've heard statistics that there's a relationship, this is for the nerds in the group, there's a relationship between, in TED Talks, between the number of views and the number of laughs per minute.
Interesting.
One of the things that happens for us when we laugh is we immediately pay more attention because we are anticipating a second laugh. So I always say, if you're in a client meeting, if you're have a staff meeting, if you're in a Zoom environment, if you can tell a funny 30-second or minute-long story at the beginning, you will set the tone for the rest of the meeting. It will be more connected, more relaxed, more creative, more innovative. Super easy trick, works so well. It doesn't even have to be that funny. It can just be like a little bit of a snort or something like that, See what I just did? Like that wasn't even a funny joke and I got a laugh. So even an attempt to be funny, especially in a professional environment, will work really, really well. What are some other questions, comments? Like, tell me, what are you learning right now? What have you learned so far in the last kind of 70 minutes?
I liked your GoPro analogy. I thought that was really good, as though people are actually watching it happen. And also the advice I thought was key, that you can't, like, telling a story about a big event. I mean, that's, you really can't put the GoPro in that. Mm-hmm. So that's not going to work.
It's hard. Yeah, sorry. And I know I picked on Vikram, and I picked on somebody else, Michael, before, I think, because they did what we all often do when we tell stories about our life, is we give these summaries. So one of the habits I'm asking you to start to break in yourself is skimming over the most interesting part. The most interesting part is always what's happening in real time in the moment. And what you're going to find is, by focusing on that, you'll find a way to fill in the details. Like somewhere in that story of walking upstairs to open up the envelope on his desk, AJ was going to tell us that he was applying to film school, that detail we needed to know. We didn't need to know anything else. So we could actually find that when we tell stories in this way, we end up saying a lot more with a lot less. It's way, way more efficient. Other thoughts, comments? I can see your brains all kind of whirring simultaneously.
I think I would share the other part of that, I think, is actually the preparation. I think sometimes, I know I certainly fall prey to thinking, you just tell a story, and sometimes that's fine. But I was in another environment where it was drilled home that you need to prepare for that. And I think preparing to tell a story makes for a better story.
Yeah, I agree. And I specifically want to introduce this very basic exercise that we've been doing, which is partnering up with somebody, telling a story and getting feedback. Because the nature of storytelling is that it's relational. It doesn't matter if I think my story is great. If you don't think my story is great, it sucks. So it's really important for me that I get your feedback to validate or verify what works and what doesn't work. You know, I would say that one of the most important components about storytelling, as we all know, is empathy, which literally means my ability to understand what's interesting to you. And I mean, I'm doing it right now in real time. I'm watching your faces to the extent that I can, and I'm trying to figure out who's bored, who's engaged, how engaged are you, who's participating, who's rolling their eyes. And I'm changing my habits or I'm changing my approach based on what I'm reading off of you. That for me is really effective storytelling, because it's not just focused on what I want to explain to you, but it's focused on what it is that I think you can learn and what you're actually responding to in the moment.
Right. You know, this should know better, right? Yeah, no, I'm learning a lot. It's great. Great feedback in the last couple sessions. So yeah, I appreciate that personal feedback, which makes a big difference.
Great. How was it this third time around? What was different this time?
Thought it was easier a third time around, having listened to some of the feedback and choosing an easier story.
Great. Were people, hey, Kale, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I was able to set the stage and kind of hit the climax a little bit better. Yeah, and really get some feeling, and I added some texture and some taste and, you know, some of the five senses. So it was much practice.
Great. Other people, are you making progress? Are you getting stuck? What's happening? Yeah.
Your recipe works.
Great.
It's just going to take some practice. And yeah, no, it's really helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. And now you understand why at the beginning I said, get your brain or get your logic out of the way for a little while.
Yeah, that's hard for some of us.
Yeah, I know.
I tell the most boring stories, let me tell you, but it's going to change.
And I really
it's difficult because we don't have a brain to take off.
Anyone have a really big aha or is noticing a really big change for themselves as they've gone through the last kind of 90 minutes or so? Who feels like a better storyteller than they were 90 minutes ago?
Yeah.
Great.
That's amazing.
Yeah, not
Like
explaining.
Yeah, that's a good one. Not explaining.
Yeah.
I just had an observation, Jordan. I'm a Dale Carnegie graduate, and I took one of the aspects of that is storytelling. And there's a lot of things that you're bringing up that are just pulling from my memory on how to tell stories. And the thing that I remember from the course is that you have to actually you have to always try to be, put in those positions or force yourself to be in those positions, or then you just forget, right? And it almost made me a little disappointed in myself. Why have I not kept this up? So I'm glad that I'm on the call today. Thank you, because it's important that you realize on all these little points, because it's just going to make you a better presenter. But you got to keep it up. That's the big thing.
Yeah, great. Maybe one other aha or piece of feedback or learning that someone's got.
I just like this notion of honing in on the 5 seconds. And I hear in some of the story examples people have given, my own interest builds when it's very specific. And I'm thankful for that insight, because I've been trying to go the other way and be less specific, because I'm trying to get my story out quicker to make it, more, interesting, and then kind of move on, as opposed to being less rambly. And I think you need to become a little bit rambly as you talk through that 5 second zoomed in section. So that's a complete change in direction for where I'd been going with my stories.
And I think there's a way to be strategically rambling, there's always that joke. Somebody mentioned it before, I think it was you, Kevin, about, get to the point. Like, a lot of us know those storytellers who take their time. So learning how and when to take time is some of the skill that you develop with practice. Because when you capture someone's attention, then you can draw it out. And you might even hear, like, I notice as I become a better storyteller, the way I structure it in my sentences. right? Where I'll like start with something. Like one of the most interesting things I've ever learned is, and then I'll kind of take this dramatic pause in my sentence and then tell you whatever the thing is. So the rhythm, it becomes part of the way that the story gets told. Does that make sense? And the word, you know, for me, I said this before, like what was the most important thing that I tried to teach today? Does anybody remember? None.
Yes, don't explain.
Not
Don't
about
explain.
explaining.
No explaining.
About emotional connection.
Don't explain emotion, but yes to emotional connection. And the word I think of here, and this is a strange word, so bear with me, is intimacy. Because when I'm describing something to you that is about my feelings or my memories, it is inherently intimate. I'm sharing something with you that you can't observe about me. You wouldn't know that about me unless I shared it with you. And so the level of emotional connection is always going to be related to the level of vulnerability in the intimacy. And, you know, Bessie, I'm not going to tell Bessie's story, but what was really interesting about just talking to Bessie is she used this phrase, I vividly remember. And when she said that, like I literally salivated because it was now this moment of like, wow, I'm getting to know this stranger on this very intimate level, right? Because she's vividly sharing something that's happening inside of her. And I think using the phrase, not the memory doesn't matter, but the act of sharing the memory is what creates that sensation of connection, authenticity, vulnerability, all the stuff that we talked about earlier. So really honing in and becoming more comfortable with that level of intimacy is what draws people to you, whether they're employees or whether they are clients or customers or whatever else. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, so we've got about 20 minutes left, and I promised you that after 90 minutes, you could bring your brains back. So what I want to start bringing back into this conversation is, well, what do you do with this? You had this nice experience today. You learned a couple things. What do you think some of the implications are, not just in your communication and your public speaking, but, you know, earlier I posed this question about telling stories about the future. When you hear that phrase now, what do you think that means? Telling stories about the future.
You're talking about your vision, where you would like it to go, or where you would, you know, some vision that you have for the future that you want to make happen, right? And that, you know, at least with all of us, where we have teams and companies we're working with, we want to be able to communicate that to our teams in ways that they feel the same thing that we feel, the same buy-in, and are emotionally connected to that goal.
I think that's bang on. And I would say to every one of you, as a leader of an organization, you need to have a future vision story. And to qualify that a step further, that future vision story cannot be told in numbers. It cannot be an explanation. It actually needs to be a vivid memory of the future. It's a really strange phrasing, so bear with me for a second. I often speak to leaders who say, you know, I have a vision, you know, next year we're going to raise revenue by 40%, and then we're going to cut costs by 17%, and so on and so forth. It's not that that's wrong, but that's not a vision, that's a plan. And that's a really important distinction. If I say, you know, in the future, I see myself working with a more diverse team. If I say in the future, I see myself working with more exciting and powerful clients. In the future, I have this feeling of camaraderie in my organization, then I'm giving you that vivid, intimate vision of the memory of the future. Does that kind of make sense?
And so I take it a step forward, maybe like to try to imagine the 5 seconds. Like if you go to your diversity, can I say, I'm looking around and I see this diverse team, and here we all achieved what we are trying to do, or something kind of imaginary 5 second that will happen in the future. Is that what you're thinking of?
Exactly. And, you know, in business, we have this problem because we do buzzword soup all the time. So these days, you know, diversity, inclusion, belonging, you know, growth, innovation, all of these different things, they're words, but they're actually explanations. And so the challenge, just like Yarden is saying, is to take that word and to ground it back into the vision. So not just do I want my organization to be innovative, but I can see in the future my team coming together with no technology and spending 2 hours together in a room with whiteboards, feeling really excited about the product that they're designing. When I see that, then other people are going to get attracted to that too, because they'll be able to feel it viscerally. Just like, you know, when we're watching Ajay go up the stairs, you know, I'm there viscerally with him in the same way. So when we're thinking about vision stories, we really need to find that 5-second moment that doesn't even exist yet. And by starting to talk about it, we actually can make it exist, because it now starts to become a shared vision among a group. I want to just kind of pause and let you digest that and talk about that with me a little bit. What does that bring up for you when you hear me say that stuff?
I'll throw in that when you say something out loud and you share it with people, you're that much more determined to see it through and make it happen, right? Versus it just being something that you're thinking at the back of your mind. And then you have others who along the way are there to remind you and work on it with you and create what that channel is going to be to achieve that end goal. So there's always more energy when it's more than just you, and there's other people working along with you towards that same vision. So the sharing and the storytelling and the describing what it looks like helps everyone else who you're bringing into your team see their way there with you.
Totally. And I want to say that the opposite of that, you know, I work with clients and sometimes they use this word alignment. Has anyone used that word alignment today 1,000 times? And often what it means, alignment, is, you know, we talk at each other with our ideas and we get the sense that we both agree on something conceptual. But we have an agreement, but we don't actually have the level of emotional, vivid understanding that we have when we are talking at that 5-second level. So the challenge is to be able to take the alignment one step deeper so that it's an emotional alignment and not a conceptual alignment. Because it's the emotional alignment that can create exactly what you just talked about, Robin. Other folks, thoughts, ideas on this? How does this relate to the work that you do or the way that you're forming your vision right now?
Can you talk about the sort of the suspense and the conflict resolution in relate, because we've talked about sort of a vision, but I don't quite see the story part of it.
Well, I mean, you brought up conflict earlier.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, one component about vision that we're talking about is that ability to create a 5-second moment. Mm-hmm. But inherent in that often is a conflict that you're trying to overcome. So diversity and inclusion is a very easy one, because when we talk about the 5-second moment of lots of people from different backgrounds working together, what's the conflict? What's the opposite of that? You know, maybe like patriarchy or the world that we live in already, right? So when we start to set up the opposite, then we create the tension and the excitement for that. Does that make sense? What I mean to say maybe more particularly is the vision has to be big enough that it's going to create desire and suspense and tension for somebody. So it's not just about, oh, we want to raise sales 5% or 15% or 500%. Because is that going to be enough to drive someone to buy into the vision? Or is there something bigger that can draw them in that makes it more purposeful and meaningful? Does that make sense?
Kind of. The release of that the release of the tension is kind of that moment of truth of a story, and I'm just not seeing it when you're talking about. It's sort of inherent, implicit, different from today.
Does anybody else hear it or see it? What do you think about when you think about conflict and tension in these future kind of stories?
Yeah, I think conflict resolution in the future stories determines who's on the bus and who's off the bus.
Yeah, exactly. Say a little bit more about that, just to say what you mean, because I like that.
What it means is when you put your vision forward and you create suspension and conflict around it, then those individuals who agree with your vision and align emotionally you'll know that they should be on your bus. And those who don't, you'll quickly find out that they're not the right fit for you moving forward. So then you'll make a decision to remove them, or they'll remove themselves.
Yeah, the vision can be about taking a stand for something.
That, or just even the vision, if you want to move your company from A to B, and it's a little bit uncomfortable, and that uncomfort may align with people, some people, and may not align with others.
Kevin, you had your hand up too.
I can speak to that, but first, do all the non-Kevins realize how incredibly lucky you are on this call today? You've got 3 of us Kevin, in one spot. Anyhow, 10%. But in tourism, we're setting expectations, right? And as we head off on a week-long expedition, I'm doing the welcome on board talk, and I sit down with my clients, and I say, we're not going to a zoo. This is wilderness. You may not see that bear or that whale that you came out to see. Conflict. And I say, but our slogan has become, we put ourselves in the path of the magic. So hopefully we've got a pretty good chance to see what you're here to see. And I think that works.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyone else thoughts on this idea of the vision story, or in the last 10 minutes, any other comments or questions that came up today?
I would share that I think the art form even a step further, and I'm thinking of a conversation I had with one of my people today around the company values and around our approach to growing leaders for the future within our company. And I think that if there was a way to have them create the story, I think it's not just telling the story, but helping others to see how to create their story, that then shows them that 5 seconds that perhaps is a different outcome, where they're ready to write somebody off versus see this potential, in this vision, their own vision. I don't think it is just necessarily about seeing my vision. It's about them understanding the potential for them to create their own vision with this person in it. So I didn't say that very well, but that really is.
I would double thumbs up and triple underline that I think what I'm seeing in great organizations today who are managing change is that they are involving their team, whatever that means, in the defining of the 5-second moment. So it's not the leader's vision, but it's the collective's vision. And the collective vision helps to reinforce what Ernie said about if you're making the vision, then that helps to bring you on the bus. And if you're not part of the vision, then you don't have to be part of the bus. But if it's just coming from the leader, then the dynamic is a bit different. Other thoughts, questions, feedback? We got a couple minutes left, and I think Bessie wants to do a quick wrap up with the survey before I go.
Just building on what Ernie said and a little bit about what Tom said also. I think by talking about your vision and talking about the challenges you see along the way, really what you're talking about is you're talking about a journey that you're going to be taking. And these are all the team members that are going to be going on the journey with you. And you don't know all the things that are going to happen to you along the way. These are the things that you think. But again, you want to make sure you get the right people on the bus. And as Ernie was saying, the people that will stick with you through those challenges. So it's really good to try and envision and speak about those challenges in ways that are really, I guess, clear and relatable. But also what Tom said, being able to allow everybody with it on the bus to be able to tell their own story about that journey and their role in it. They have to see themselves in it as well, right?
I think that's really powerful. And I want to contrast with what Brian just said with the old model of change, which is, hey, we're at A, we're going to get to B. Here's the plan. Here's the change management communication process. You're either on or you're not, right? That's much more of a closed story. And the reason why you would want to tell more of a kind of open-ended story like the one Brian's talking about is because, as we all know, and as I mentioned at the beginning, everything in the world is changing right now, and absolutely no one has any fucking idea what's going to happen tomorrow. And so it's much more important to focus on the how, which means the process of bringing people on board, writing the story, maybe to use a metaphor, one chapter at a time, rather than saying, that's where we're going and here are the steps to get there. Instead, it becomes a process more like this, where it's participatory, people are doing it together, and you're kind of constantly going from envisioning that 5-second moment to coming back and evaluating, oh, is that still the moment we want to move to, or do we want to move to a different moment? It's much more dynamic and it's much more creative. And in my opinion, that's what business is going to look like across the board over the next kind of year to several years and into the future, as things become harder and harder to predict. They're already there right now. So, you know, connecting this idea of the way that we tell stories about the past to now the way that we tell stories about the future. Other thoughts, comments? Has this been helpful?
Yeah, it's been great.
Wonderful.
A lot of power.
Cool, great. It would behoove me, of course, to pitch myself at the end of this. And I want to just say briefly that I do coaching one-on-one with folks. And I also work with organizations where I actively come in and help change stories. And so I think that Scott has access to my information with my website. So would that be the best way to share it, or what's the best way?
That'd be just fine. jordanbauer.com, I believe, is it? That's a
We can Google you.
Google this face.
Yeah.
But I want to say it's been a real pleasure to chat with you. It's been really fun to watch how much growth you've gone through in the last kind of 90 minutes to 2 hours. And I'm happy to stick around for a little while longer and address your questions one-on-one. And I know there's a bit of a social gathering afterwards. But thank you so much for your time today. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jordan. I just want to remind everybody, it's in the chat box. The survey, please take 10 seconds. That's all it will take to give us your feedback. Really appreciate it. And thank you, Jordan.
My pleasure. Happy storytelling.
There you go. So that just to wrap things up then. So if I could be so bold as to tell you a brief story. So so when I got this, when people started showing up at the event today, and I was thinking, oh my God, I've never actually seen this guy in action before. This is a bit of a risk. Will this guy going to be okay? Am I going to come off looking okay in this? And are people going to get value? And am I going to get value? And then he comes on, he's all confident, he's all calm. We got 50 people showing up, and immediately break out into a breakout. People come back, they're all energized. And there was this moment when he got into, how do you zoom in on the 5 seconds? I believe he was doing a breakout. And your story, we went, and I saw the whole audience all paying close attention and nodding. I thought, that's the moment. That's the moment when I realized it's going to be okay. And people are going to, no matter what happens after this, it's going to be a great event. And that's just kind of the lifeblood of a learning share. So thank you all.
Great story.
You're a fast learner, Scott.
So nobody has to leave. You can all hang out as long as you want. And maybe we'll give people a chance to sign off if they feel like they're done here, and then depending on how many people are left, we'll maybe break into little groups to have some little small